been 50 years today since one of the most notorious Halloween crime cases in American history took place, striking fear into a Texas neighborhood and haunting trick-or-treaters ever since. On October 31st, 1974, Timothy O'Brien, of 8 years old, returned to his home in Houston after trick-or-treating that night. His father, Ronald O'Brien, gave Timothy a piece of candy before sending him to bed, a pixie stick. Ronald helped his son open the candy tube, but Timothy would complain that the candy tasted bitter. He grabbed his son a glass of Kool-Aid to wash the bitter taste out of his mouth, and then put his son to bed. Timothy almost immediately began vomiting, and then started to convulse. Less than an hour later, Timothy lost his life as he was being transported to the hospital. His father claimed the candy had been poisoned, but after further investigation, police discovered Ronald was the one who had poisoned his son with cyanide. He had cut open multiple tubes of the candy, inserting in the poison, then handing it to children, which came close to killing 3 other neighborhood kids, as well as his 5-year-old daughter. However, Timothy would be the only one to fall victim of his poisoning. Ronald O'Brien, who in the media became known as the Candyman, had recently taken a new $31,000 life insurance policy out on Timothy and was trying to gain the insurance funds to pay off his debts. During his trial 1 year later, the jury spent less than an hour deliberating before finding O'Brien's guilty. He was sentenced to death, ultimately facing his execution 10 years later. Outside the building where O'Brien was executed, a crowd of around 300 people gathered chanting, "Trick or treat," and threw candy at those protesting against the death penalty. This story contributed greatly to the stigma of strangers' Halloween candy for years to come.
Most of today's testimony came from Jimmy Bates, a close friend of the O'Brien family. Bates said that before Halloween, O'Brien asked if he could bring his children over to trick-or-treat with the Bates children on Halloween night. Both families ate dinner together, and then the fathers took the children trick-or-treating. Bates said O'Brien went to one house where no one appeared to be home, and after the children had scampered ahead to the next house, O'Brien came off the front porch carrying the pixie sticks. He gave the pixie sticks to the children and then later took them back and said he wanted to stop at his car for a moment. Bates said when O'Brien came back into the Bates house, he returned the pixie sticks to the children. Later that night, Timothy O'Brien died from eating a poisoned pixie stick.
After settling down for the night, married couple Peter and Betty Fabiano awoke to a doorbell ring at 11 at night on October 31st, 1957. Peter, thinking it was some late-night trick-of-treaters, went to the door with some candy in hand. He was met with a woman in a mask holding a brown bag pointed at the door. The woman fired a weapon she had concealed in the bag, hitting Peter in his chest, killing him instantly. Police later arrested a woman by the name of Joan Rebel, who had reportedly had a romantic relationship with Betty Fabiano. However, Joan had convinced Goldine Pizer to be the one to pull the trigger that would end Peter's life on Halloween night. Betty told police that they had married in 1955. Only one thing kept their marriage from being perfect, which was Betty's relationship with Joan. The two women knew each other before Betty met Peter. There was something about the way the two women acted toward each other that made Peter uncomfortable. He and Betty argued about it, even causing Betty to leave the house for a month after Peter forbid her from seeing Joan again. However, after a month, she came back and agreed. To Joan, Peter stood in the way of her plan to get much, much closer to Betty. She hated him for breaking up her relationship with Betty. 6 weeks after the murder, Goldine admitted to the slaying and told officers Joan talked her into committing the crime. They were friends for 4 years, planning the crime 3 months prior. Joan convinced Goldine the victim was a vile, evil man, one who destroyed all the people around him. Rather than face trial, Goldine and Joan pleaded guilty and were sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Same-sex relationships were illegal in California at the time, which may be why Joan accepted a plea deal. Betty Fabiano was never convicted for any connection in her husband's death. It was Halloween season when people would see a 35-year-old man by the name of Derek Ward at a Long Island apartment complex making a spooky spectacle for spectators. Out onto the festive Halloween-decorated street, he threw out onto it what appeared to be a fake bloodied body, which he then allegedly kicked the head that was separated from it. Witnesses to the aftermath say they did not comprehend the horror of what they had seen once they started to realize it wasn't a Halloween prank, but actually a real body. The headless victim would soon be identified as Derek's mother, Patricia Ward. Derek had reportedly had a history of mental health problems stretching back over the past decade and had been arrested for various petty crimes before the incident. However, there was no record of previous domestic incidents involving him and his mother. The weapon used was believed to be a knife, which had been recovered. Derek Ward allegedly threw himself under a train shortly after ending the life of his mother. Patricia Ward was in the community for 28 years and was a well-liked woman.
And I assumed it was a stupid Halloween prank and the cops were going to be furious that somebody would do this. That's what I put in my head.
And now that you know it wasn't a prank?
It's so sad. It is sad.
Police add Mr. Ward never recovered from the death of his grandfather in August of last year. They note the beheading of Ms. Ward had nothing to do with the beheading by ISIS jihadists.